Thank you for viewing this YouTube archive of a Conscious Consumer Network broadcast. Please feel free to share it far and wide. Check out our weekly broadcast guide for weekly updates on scheduled broadcasts. Help keep us on the air by contributing to our network support fund. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or get in touch by email. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
Hi there, welcome to another live online broadcast of Pateo Television, brought to you via CCN, Conscious Consumer Network.tv. My name is Johan Oldenkamp. I'm the host of this internet talk show, television talk show, and the guest of this episode is sitting right beside me in our virtual room. His name is Mr. Dan A. Davidson. Dan, welcome in the show.
Thank you, Johan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I think I'm also very pleased that you could make time for us, because I encountered your work I think a couple of months ago, and I was so enthusiastic about what you've done, especially in the field of shape power. So I was really delighted that you accepted the invitation to be on the show today. But before we go into what you call etheric science, can you please give a short introduction of yourself as a human being? What have you done so far in your life, and anything you want to share with the audience?
Well, Johan, I do appreciate you having me on here. It's a pleasure to be here. Usually I've talked to large audiences and given lectures and things, but to be on some worldwide thing and I'm talking to a computer, it's kind of interesting, and the difference. But I do appreciate the opportunity, and I hope everybody out there gets some good information that'll help them. I've been at this for quite a while. I'm kind of gotten to the geezer stage, and everything is in our society seems to be converging on a new alternate view of science and reality, which is it seems to be moving, although kind of slowly to me, in the right direction. Basically, we live in a spiritual universe, and that has been my view for a long time. I think we ought to switch to the slides, because I'm ready to start about the briefing.
Yes, that's what we'll do then. Yeah, I should take it away, Dan. And every time you want me to continue to the next slide, just give me a sign.
Okay. The talk's going to be on shape power, and it's basically a subset of etheric science, which is I've been focusing on more. I did as much as I could in the shape power area, but the shape power stuff led into a more expanded view of science and expanded understanding of how the universe functions. Next slide, please.
Yes.
Now, this is just a little grabber for you. The destiny of this electron, which happens to, this is a very stylized view of the electron and the various forces of it. The destiny of electron, next slide.
I understand that the red and the blue somehow are the path of the electron, but what is the yellow, Dan, in this picture?
Yeah, this I'm going to talk about this picture later on.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the destiny of the electron to become this, a sun and a solar system. And all of those electrons that are floating around in the atoms, they eventually evolve to higher levels. And we're on the next phase of this, which is the next here on this Earth. Our planet is one of the electrons that is floating around the sun in a great sea of energy and space. Next slide. Here's our dear Earth, a great blue marble in space. We're looking here at the northern hemisphere, and I'm down there in Arizona. Live in Arizona, nice area. We live at a high altitude here. We're fairly close to the Mexican border. We do have a lot of energy and things because we're at a high altitude. The altitude here is almost a mile high. So we do have a little bit of winter, but not much. It's kind of cool outside today, around 40 or 45, 50. Next slide, please. Now, the topics I'm going to cover is a little autobiographical of myself, how I got into all this crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. And the ether, a brief description of my definition of it. And I'm going to go through a view of shape power and discuss atomic particles, get into etheric science and what I think is a new frontier of science. Right now, probably since the 40s and 50s, we haven't really made big leaps in science, although there's been a lot of hoopla about it. Most of the progress we have made has been in technology. We have perfected the rough diamond that was started back in the 40s and 50s. And we have this fantastic electronic technology. Most of it has its basis in Tesla, and the science I'm going to talk about is more based, I think, on John Keeley, who was preceded and actually a contemporary of Tesla at the time. I'm going to give a few interesting examples of etheric science and talk about the programmable universe and the master power flame technology and a little bit about the future. So next slide, please. The way this life started out, I had several near-death experiences. One was when I was quite young. I was about 3 days old. And this had happened in the hospital. I was having, they did a little operation on my body to fix something, and the doctor was a little bit of a klutz, and he didn't fix things properly. And the next thing I do, I'm standing outside this little body and wandering around the hospital, and there's this lady that's making a big fuss that she needed to go check on Dan. Well, Dan was me. So she finally got the attention of one of the nurses, and they went in and checked me in the infant area where they take care of the little babies. And they found out I was bleeding to death, and they right away called the doctors in, and they fixed my body. And later on, when I was about 8 years old, I had an NDE also. And at that time, I almost died of carbon monoxide poisoning. And what had happened is my older brother had bought an old Oldsmobile limousine, and the floorboards in it were rusted out, and so was a muffler. And they were Dad and my older brother were driving out of town, and I was in the back seat. And all of a sudden, Dad and Roy got sick and ended up stopping the car and getting out and getting very sick and cleaning their system out. And then they realized that I was still in the back seat of the car. So they tried to revive me and couldn't do it. By all this time, I was standing outside my body and watching all this drama going on. So they ran back into town and went to see Dr. Smiley. That was his actual name. And they brought me in this little area where he had his doctor's office in his home, and he tried to revive me with oxygen and a few other things. I was standing watching this whole drama, and the next thing I know, this doctor brings up this big hypodermic needle. It looked like the needle was about 1 foot long, and they were standing over this my body that was on this gurney, and he jams this needle into my heart. I guess it was adrenaline. And it restarted the body, and I was back in the body almost instantly. But as a result of this, it changed my perspectives. Sometimes I think we all ought to have an NDE to wake us up, because what happens is when we come into this world through the birth channel that we have, we pick up a lot of the negative patterns and things that are around our parents and that are in the atmosphere of Earth. And the NDE actually cuts you free from a lot of this. They've done studies of near-death experiences of people that had NDEs at a young age, and the net result was that these people are all different. My NDEs made me a weirdo as far as the other kids in school were concerned. And the other thing that I got very interested in was about 10 or 11 was we had a lot of flying saucer phenomena back in the early 50s. And so I read the books by Leslie and Adamski on Behind the Flying Saucers and some other alternative views. And this set me up to be interested in science, and I was always kind of interested in building and studying things. So I wanted to study the science. So what I found out was that our current science back then was in its infancy. We were working with a kind of a crude electronic technology, and we're back in the tube era. There was no transistors until we got into the 60s. So I thought in high school I was going to learn about the real science when I got to college. And I ended up getting math and engineering degrees. But I found out that science was about the same it was in high school, just more of the same. So at that time, I had prayed to God to teach me the science of the universe, how it really functions. And I dedicated my life's effort to understanding how God's universe really functions. And this prayer, even though it was a simple-minded thing, caused doors to open. And I met some of the most fantastic people, especially while I was going to college and then in later life, that knew things that were quite beyond our current science. So one of the things I've done in all this time since then is I've studied, done research, I've gotten into the experimental mode of doing a lot of things. I meditate every day. The thing is to tune in and learn to follow your guidance. You got to learn to follow your higher self that shows you the truth of things. There's not a whole lot of truth out here in the outer world, and so you have to kind of dig and get tuned in and find out what it is. So next slide, please.
Yeah, I fully subscribe to what you say there, Dan. But when, as an 8-year-old, you were out of your body, you had also an out-of-body experience, or only a near-death experience?
Okay, I think I've been at a number of different levels. The basic NDE is it occurs at different stages. Being out of the body is just one of them.
Yeah.
If you go through the tunnel of light and meet some of the beings of light on the other side, that's the next stage in an NDE. And it progresses like this. Probably one of the most complete descriptions of the NDE was in by I'm trying to think of his name. They made a movie about him. The name escapes me right now, but I'll think about it. Basically, he went through all of these stages, and he was shown visions of the future and of things that he was supposed to do when he came back to Earth. This is Danny and Brinkley. I knew I'd think about it. And Danny is quite a character. I've ever seen him talk. He and I were both speakers at one of the conferences, and I got to meet him. And to this day, he's quite a guy. NDE changed him so radically. He was a hitman that was hired by Mossad and the CIA and DIA and various foreign agencies. And that was his mode in life until he got struck by lightning. And it totally changed, this NDE had totally changed everything the way he was. And so an NDE does change you. It cuts you free from the garbage, so to speak, of this world.
Okay. Thanks for clearing it up. I will continue. Yeah.
Thank you. Next. Okay. Where science is today. From 1900 to 1990, we were pretty much dominated by Einstein. We had special relativity, the multidimensional universe, general relativity, quantum mechanics, and quantum electrodynamics. And they eliminated the ether back then because of a misinterpretation of the Michelson-Morley experiment, which was really poorly designed at the time, and also because they didn't really understand how the ether functioned. So the net result of this is we ended up with no creative force, a materialistic view of the universe, and that was really a big screw up. There was no thing such as greater than the speed of light. This period of the 1900s retarded physics. The entire 100 years was based mainly on the theories and studies by Einstein. And alternative science and physics was suppressed. Ideas such as transmutation of the elements faster than the light, speed of light, the ether concept, over unity energy and energy healing, electronic medicine, all of that was severely suppressed. Even though in Europe and England, homeopathy was accepted, and radiesthesia, which is also called radionics, was accepted. Here in the United States, it was pretty much downgraded and it was pretty much suppressed, I would say. Next slide, please.
Yeah, one of your lectures you say that the good thing is that Einstein gets more and more dead nowadays, and I really like that.
I think science is starting to recognize that science, as Einstein described it, had a bunch of holes in it. I've been pointing out a lot of these holes for years, and there's probably at least 10 or a dozen anomalies that don't fit in with Einstein's theories and the quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is kind of like a chameleon. It keeps trying to change its spots to say it believes in all this stuff, but it does need some serious overwork.
Yes.
And so what is happening is that we got a few new theories like string theory and some other stuff that is coming out, but until they embrace the concept of a ether and a consciousness-based universe, they're pretty much going down a dead-end street. Now, in the alternative science arena, remember I'd say go to the 1950s, we had an emergence of alternative ideas. There was things like radionics and psychotronics. There was some things like pyramid power, a lot of write-up on pyramid power and pyramid energy. Even back in the 60s when I was in college, I used to argue with a professor in one of my classes about the ether, and I told him about the pyramid things. So he gave me a whole class period to demonstrate pyramid power. And so he said it had to be scientific. So understanding how, psychologists work, they're interested in the concept of being able to test things even though they are somewhat unorthodox. And they're interested in a statistical approach to life. With your background, Johan, you probably understand this very well. They believe in basically a statistical approach to study. And this is the mindset that I went into this test class. So I worked up a sheet, and I had several nice pyramids that I built for the class. And I passed the pyramids around in the class and asked the people if they could feel the energies. And it turned out that 90% of the people could feel energy coming off the pyramid. And the professor really didn't like this. He didn't think there was going to be any result from this test. And the people in the class were all amazed that they could feel this energy. Some felt a wind like coming off the pyramid. Some could feel a tingling in their hand. But 85 to 90% of them said they could feel something, and some of them thought it was just psychosomatic, the suggestion and things like that. But really, ether physics is returning. The physics, there is some talk about a God particle and things like that in the physics community. There's a lot of people in the physics community who have developed and studied the ether, and treated ether as a hydrodynamic superfluid. Yes. And if you do this, run it through the standard mathematics that we have, you end up with a really different view of how the universe functions. But it solves all of the paradoxes and things that are in orthodox physics. So back in the history of science, Hermes was one of the big scientific healers and things back in the, I think, Egyptian period. And he believed that the elements of nature are made of the will of God. And this is being proved more and more in various aspects of metaphysics, and also in psychology. We're having a kind of renaissance of changing the view of how we operate in the universe. If we implement alternative energy, I think we're going to end up with a totally different society. We're going to have free energy. It's going to be a solution to clean energy. Gravity control, planetary personal vehicles, greater than sea communications, gravity communications, GCOM. There are new paths emerging that are greater than the speed of light. Transmutation of the elements. This has been running through in a various number of experiments. Nuclear transmutation will clean up any radioactive waste. Excuse me. The society has vested interest try to stop all this stuff because it means the end of their game. We're going to have etherealization. We're going to have matter to energy conversions with no explosions. Instead of having garbage picked up by your friendly garbage man, you're going to have a garbage can that you throw your stuff in and it gets turned back to pure energy. One of the people that I met in my trek through meeting all these fantastic people was a guy that had actually broke down the codes of how etherealization operated. And he had this friend of mine throw a piece of paper into this trash can, and the piece of paper disappeared. And a person said, "Don't go stick your hand in there. This is a real deal."
Oh, yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, this brings
one of the things that this trek through studying metaphysics led me to the teachings of the Ascended Masters. And I was up in Mount Shasta one time, and I met some guys that were working in the Shasta and for the Saint Germain Foundation, and they had they were interested in science and things, and so I got to talking to them, and I found out that they had developed a special new device. Excuse me. They were interested in cleaning the paint off the walls of old houses so they could be repainted. And they had made some big advances in radionics. And they could project excuse me, they could project a beam on the wall and strip the paint off.
That's fantastic.
Quite impressive.
Very impressive, yes.
And I asked them what they were going to do with it, and they said, well, we talked to Saint Germain, and Saint Germain said, well, he says, you got a fantastic invention, but he said it's going to be misused. You can imagine no corpus delicti and that sort of thing with this kind of a technology.
Yeah, you could erase all your traces. That's true, yeah.
So that put an end to that particular invention.
Yeah, but the technology is available. That's good news, Dan.
Yeah.
Just to add to you, Trismegistus is actually the Greek name for a kind of god that was named Thoth in ancient Egypt, or Kemet. But it is, of course, the same character. And he's one of my big sources of inspiration, too.
Yes, Hermes was quite the character.
Absolutely.
Next slide. Some of the historical aspects of ether. Back in 540, Heraclitus used the word logos, and he believed this is a rational structure of the cosmos that orders and controls the universe. There was Zeno, who was a founder of Stoic philosophy. Logos was the active reason pervading and animating the universe. It was conceived of as material. In other words, the ether is a material energy substance. The ether was identified with God and nature. And logos is the law of generation in the universe. And the principles working in inanimate matter, what we call inanimate matter, is actually a consciousness. And humans possess a portion of the divine logos. Now, down through the ages, we've had various avatars. We had back in the Hindu eras, various avatars. Krishna was one of them. And the thing is that when you get to this advanced state of spiritual consciousness, you manifest the perfection that is in the logos. So when Jesus came along, he manifested the consciousness of the logos. He was one with the basic perfection of the universe, and he came to earth at that time to show mankind what is possible for all of us. Unfortunately, the Christian church was dominated by those who viewed him as a god rather than as an example. And what we have today in Christianity is a rather distorted view of what is really possible for all of us. We're all great, powerful spiritual beings. Another person of interest, Logos consciousness was the living God. That was Philo of Alexandria. And he believed that the Logos was the bond that holds all things together. A very spiritual-centric universe.
Can you say the name again, Dan, please? Sorry to interrupt.
Pardon?
Can you say the name again of the guy who brought this forward? I couldn't hear you good.
Yeah, Philo of Alexandria.
Okay, now, the name after that. Sorry to disturb you, but maybe it will come later.
Okay, next slide, please.
Yeah, what I can add to this is when you look at the Gospel of John, it also says in the beginning was the Word, but actually the Word was a translation of the word logos because it was written in Greek. So it was also very clearly there. The logos was the start, the beginning. And Heraclitus at the top was also the guy who spoke the famous words allegedly of pantarei, everything flows. So it's a flow in the logos, in the etheric fields, to my understanding.
Yes.
I'll leave the floor to you. Thanks.
Okay, now the logos patterns are energies. The ancients thought that logos is basically a spiritual force operating and controlling the universe. Consciousness and energy was a product of logos. And some of the scientists that were really locked into this was John Keely, who was a 19th century scientist, believed that consciousness acted in through the ether. The ancient Hindus and yoga, Vastu science believed the same way. The modern teaching of the Ascended Masters and many areas of metaphysics agree that consciousness is above the ether and matter is created from the ether. consciousness controls the energy of the logos. The masters term the logos as the master power flame. And I'm going to talk about this later. Next slide, please. Just a few of the great avatars and adepts that have been around. Of course, we got Blessed Jesus, Saint Germain, Babaji, and Yogananda. All of these were great masters that have exhibited higher consciousness and miracles while they were here on this planet. Next slide, please. I'm going to do a little review. Shape power physics. Johan was quite interested in me talking about this particular aspect of in the talk, so I'm going to do a little review of the Shape Power book. So the next slide. Shape power is a phenomenon whereby shapes convert the ether, undifferentiated universal ether, into electricity, magnetism, gravity, and nuclear forces. And I'm going to show how this is the case.
So this clearly states that ether is the source of all these phenomena.
Yes.
Yes, great.
Out of the ether comes all these forces.
Yeah.
As well as all matter.
Yeah, it's in your book, and people can still buy it, and also the second book, but you'll talk about it later, of course.
Yeah, well, I still have a few copies of the Shape Power book. I don't have very many of them, but I still have probably a dozen or so. And the other book I wrote was Breakthrough to New Free Energy Devices, which preceded Shape Power. And it was a lot of stories about different people who had developed various things in the alternative science field during the 1900s. The basic shape power discovery, which I proved in the lab using a flux gauge magnetometer and using clairvoyance, who could see the energies. Now, this may sound a little strange, using physical instrumentation is one thing, but using people as who have capabilities, who can see these energies and see what they do, is a thing that our science does not accept. It's not part of the model. I was always fascinated by a statement about Keeley back in the late 1800s. He said that he would get up on the blackboard and write a few figures on the blackboard and make some of his machinery work. Now, how could that be? How could he do that? I mean, was it some sleight of hand or something going on? Well, he actually understood the forces of patterns that control things. And we'll talk about pattern physics here in a while.
Yeah, I've studied Keeley myself too, and I see that there's a lot of people to debunk him, to say that he used all kinds of trickery, but in fact they clearly didn't understand the etheric field and how it really works. So I do think that Keeley is also a major pioneer in this field. Yes,
definitely. Keeley, they thought that he was doing phony things and being a charlatan, and he was just conning some little old lady to get him money. And so when he died, or disappeared from the scene, there was a little bit of controversy about his death. A team of scientists came from the came and analyzed his laboratory, and they tore the whole thing apart, and they found wires made out of gold and silver and tubes and things, and they found this big 4-ton iron sphere underneath the laboratory floorboards, and they thought that this was for compressed air. But they never went beyond and analyzing this big sphere. And it turned out that there had been a story in the local Philadelphia paper. One of the editors used to send one of the reporters over to go see Keeley and see what new things he had, because they had some space in the newspaper that they wanted to fill in. So it was always good copy. So this reporter went over to Keeley's lab, and And Keeley was standing there in the lab, and he had this great big sphere sitting on the floor of the laboratory, and a big, huge, thick planks that covered up the laboratory. And he was hooking a wire to this big sphere. It was a big iron sphere, weighed about several tons. And he had a belt hooked with some kind of dials and things on it that a wire ran from it over to the sphere that he had affixed to the sphere. And the reporter asked Keeley, he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm getting rid of some old equipment." And so Keeley said, watch what's going to happen. And so Keeley made a few adjustments to this instrument on his belt, and this big several-ton sphere floated up off the laboratory floor.
Wow.
And then he made a couple other adjustments and moved this big sphere over to this big hole that he tore up some floorboards in the lab, and he made a couple other adjustments on this instrument on his belt and caused this big several-ton sphere to sink down in the ground below the laboratory floor. And apparently Keeley obviously had control of gravity, both levitation and making things heavier. And he sunk this big sphere into the ground below the laboratory and then covered the thing up with these floorboards. So the Scientific American article that came out against Keeley had never done any research on him. They were just interested in debunking, and they thought Keeley ran everything with compressed air. If he did do anything with compressed air, it was 50 years ahead of his time, because at that time, nobody had the capability to use compressed air in any way, shape, or form. So the idea of using compressed air was total stupidity on the part of the scientists from the Scientific American.
Okay, thanks for clearing it out. Very, very good.
Got some really interesting stuff and some fantastic people, I'll tell you. Next slide, please. To verify this converging line idea of creating a magnetic and electrostatic fields, I contacted a friend of mine and asked him if he'd run some tests. He had a magnetometer, and he was married to a nice Chinese lady, so he had a lot of wooden chopsticks around the house. So he stuck a few of them in a styrofoam ball. Then he took his magnetometer and he measured both a magnetic and an electrostatic field around this thing, with the field being strongest down toward the tip of the, by the styrofoam. And he measured as much as 40 volts per meter from an individual chopstick, and when he had 9 of them, it generated about 250 volts per meter. The magnetic field was about 0.01 microfarad, which is about a milligauss, somewhere in that vicinity. So this was a proof that with physical instrumentation, that these wooden chopsticks were actually creating a magnetic field. These weren't metal; these were wooden. Styrofoam ball, again, a non-conductor, strictly something that would not be generated or creating magnetic or electrostatic fields. And the other thing, of course, is I had clairvoyance, could see these rotating vortexes of energy around converging lines. So I figured I had stumbled upon the basic idea that there was some way to set up forces using shapes. And the saga continues. Next slide, please. These are examples of ether concentration. The triangle, of course, you got converging lines to the 3 vertices of the triangle. Circle is an infinite, basically, somewhere between mathematically, it's an infinite number of converging lines around the periphery of the circle. So the concentration of the ethers comes into the center of the circle. The cylinder is just the three-dimensional form of the circle. Then the basic first three-dimensional figure is a tetrahedron. You've got four vertices that energy is concentrated on, and it focuses it toward the center of the tetrahedron, is actually the mathematical geometric center. And it creates a vortex off the top of it. So we're starting to get some interesting phenomena coming out of three-dimensional figures. Of course, on the lower right is the standard four-sided, four-base, square-base pyramid, where each of the vertices create a energy field that focuses into the center and focuses the ether there. This happens to be at the 1/3 height level. And coming off the top is another vortex. This one we've had photographs of them. I think Johan has a picture of this on the internet of a larger pyramid that has a Tesla coil inside the pyramid, and it's creating a vortex of energy on the top, and this was photographed.
Exactly, with Kirlian photography. That's a kind of energy photography technique, but it was clear. You could actually see the same, it's a kind of double helix, a spiral coming out of the top. It's very beautiful to see.
Yeah, the Russians have actually done some studies on this. They have built large pyramids and have measured huge increases in the electromagnetic spectrum directly above it, several miles above these large pyramids. The discoveries that the Russians have been more open to a lot of this alternative ideas, whereas they've been suppressed here in the United States during the 1900s, and I think a lot of this stupidity is finally coming unglued, and we're going to have a new science coming in here.
Yes. Yeah, what I can add to this, Dan, is that when we live in a kind of shape like this, or maybe a teepee like the Native Americans had, the energy is more concentrated in the middle. It's much more healthy than the cubes we live in nowadays. So, and of course, the pyramid is even a more powerful form to bundle energy, to focus.
Yeah, yeah. People have lived inside of pyramids and found they do have certain enhancement effects as far as consciousness and things. Back when I was studying some of this stuff back in the 60s, I was selling a small pyramid that had some magnets embedded in it to increase the amount of power they had. And this one friend of mine was interested in them, so I gave him a handful of these pyramids with the magnets embedded. They were just little 2-inch pyramids. And he took them home and stuck them under his bed. And the next day he came by and he said, something really strange happened. I was sleeping last night and I couldn't go to sleep. And I thought maybe it's the pyramids. The energy was energizing him too much and he couldn't drop off to sleep. Okay. So he said he got out of the bed and he swept these pyramids away from underneath his bed. Yeah. and got back into bed and went to sleep. Well, the next morning he wakes up and checks under the bed and the pyramids are still there. He had gotten out of the body and mentally turned off the energy in the pyramid.
What a great story! Yeah.
I've heard other people say they've had out-of-the-body experiences around pyramids. But interesting. Shapes do have various powers associated with them. Next slide.
Yeah, but that means that we can also shut off other things that are disturbing us, but I will not go into that. But that's mind over matter. Maybe we should remember that. Yeah.
That's right. Johan, you're quite right. One of the things is that ether phenomena are very subjective to the people that are around them. You can shut off this. If you've got a big thing against any kind of ether phenomena, you can actually shut the ether phenomena off. That's why it's very difficult to test for some of this stuff. If you've got a closed mind, in fact, a negative view of things, it will actually suppress results in the experiment. So we become part of the experiment, and we have to watch out how our consciousness is doing in this type of experiment. So logic really rules in all of this. Ether phenomena is real. It's created between intersecting lines. It's measurable. The vortex in the ether is a magnetic field. Therefore, intersecting lines create a magnetic field. This is proven with magnetometer and fluxgate magnetometer and clairvoyance. You can see these energies. Next slide. Joe Parr contacted me back in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, and then later on in the 90s. He had made some major breakthroughs. He had read my book on breakthroughs to nuclear energy discoveries, and he was interested in pyramid energy himself. Joe Parr was dying when I met him. He had Marfan's disease. Marfan's, if you know anything about it, is a genetically debilitating disease where your bone structure gradually deteriorates, and as a result, your body deteriorates from the DNA and stuff that are problems in your body. Well, Joe was a electrical engineer and he was working for some of the oil companies that were doing things over in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. And he wasn't doing too well because of the Marfans. So he decided to stop off in Egypt and visit the Great Pyramid. Well, this is back in the early 90s when he did this. And he was able to bribe a couple of the guards and people that are around the pyramids. And he spent 24 hours on top of the Great Pyramid, and he spent 24 hours in the pyramid in the King's Chamber. And he didn't notice much of anything other than he felt better. And he went on back home to the United States. He lived in California. And he went for a checkup to his doctor, and they found out that the Marfans went into remission. The pyramid energy had evidently done a certain amount of fixing of the DNA problems he was having, and he was doing much better. So he started doing a bunch of research in the with standard type of transducers and things, and he come up with a gamma ray transducer and found out that the gamma rays would be attenuated inside a pyramid. And he discovered other aspects of ether energy in and around a pyramid. And as one of the things he deduced was that there's a spherical etheric force field of energy centered at the 1/3 height level. This is a sphere all around the pyramid. This discovery led to the possibility of a free energy machine as well as a true space drive based on generation of gravitational force fields. I need to take a quick break here. I'll be back in a minute, okay?
Okay, great. Yeah, I think what Dan is explaining here is very very important. There is something about the shape of the pyramid that is able to to create a kind of dynamics in the ether field, and that can be very powerful. Maybe you've heard the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, who somehow wanted to conquer Egypt, and he did so. And he slept also just like Joe Parr, as Dan was explaining. He spent one night in the king's chamber, or the chamber that we call the king's chamber, because it actually has nothing to do with kings or pharaohs or whatever, but that's a completely different story. But we know that Napoleon came out as a different man from that room after lying in the sarcophagus for a whole night. So somehow we are able to connect with a bigger reality, as I would like to say it, because the ether field is everywhere. So there is some magic here, true magic going on in the shape of the pyramid, and especially at 1/3 from the bottom. So I filled in the time a little bit then, talking about Napoleon, who spent one night in the king's chamber as well, and he also got a very special experience there, as we're told.
Yeah, there have been people that have had a number of experiences in the Great Pyramid, and these have been recorded. I think they've They've had out-of-the-body experiences. They've slept in the coffer in the King's Chamber. One of the things that the pyramids seem to have been in the past was a initiation chamber for higher levels of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things the priests had to do is live in the pyramid for a certain period of time. I remember being tested on another star system when I was under some training with a pyramid. It was an interesting thing that happened to me that I remember in previous life. But that's another story. Let's go on to the next one here.
Okay. Yes, for most people it's already tough enough to understand what's going on here, so we should not make the story too big. Great.
So the pyramid has a force field surrounding it, discovered by Joe Parr, verified by myself. It does attenuate gamma rays, and it also does some other strange things. Next slide, please. One of the things that Joe discovered as part of this force field that's around the pyramid is he came up with a thing he called the centrifuge. And what it was a small pyramid that would swing around on a bar around the inside of this circular chamber, going in and out of a magnetic field. You can see these little things there and around the periphery of the thing is north-south magnetic fields all the way around the thing. And when this arm would swing around under the control of that motor that's sitting on top, this arm had the pyramids on the end of it, and these pyramids would go in and out of this force field. And one of the things that Joe found was that these pyramids would go ripping off at certain times of the year. They would acquire huge amounts of increase in mass energy, as much as 113,000 times more energy than normally that the pyramid would have is just spinning around in a circle. So Joe came up with the idea of making this into a two-dimensional system. Next slide. Joe came up with the idea of replacing the large centrifuge with a small, specially designed wheel mounted on a shaft spun by a high-speed motor. And this was a gravity wheel experiment, and it was really the first shape-power gravitational resonant array. Pyramid force fields can be switched off by a sound at 51.287 hertz. And this is the angle, 51 degrees, 287 is the phi angle of the side of the pyramid to the base. So the pyramid that was built in Egypt by these ancients was actually a book in stone to teach us about some interesting shape power science. And if you go to the next slide, this will show the experiment.
Yeah, it's very true, but we need people who can read that book, and you're one of them. And that will help us to step up to the next level, I think.
Yeah. Joe contacted me when he was building this shape power experiment, and he asked me if I would help him duplicating the experiment. And I agreed, even though it entailed me spending a bunch of money on a fancy scale and other electronic equipment. And he wanted to be able to duplicate this to make sure he didn't have what we call a lab queen, or something that it was just based on his belief or consciousness, because it's an etheric phenomena. I wanted to make sure the experiment was repeatable by somebody else, and he also wanted to try and map these energy conduits that go between our sun and other suns in our solar system and galaxy. So he came up with this little wheel that had triangles mounted on it, and the triangles were in the same shape as the side of the pyramid. And these little triangles spun between magnets, just like those 3D pyramids on the previous experiment with a centrifuge. And so they came in and out of a magnetic field. And it turns out that these little triangles also have a force field or spherical energy field around them. And when this is spun at high speed, you need a high-speed motor. You start getting some interesting effects. Let me go to the next slide. It's got a complete picture of the experimental setup we used. You had the gravity wheel in the center. You had a couple of frequency woofers, low frequency woofers that would be able to respond to that frequency of 51.287 hertz. And we had a little power supply driving a signal generator that went into an amplifier, and the amplifier drove the speakers. Very simple setup. But this whole thing, I don't want to show it on this diagram, but the whole gravity wheel experiment, not the speakers, but the gravity wheel part of it, was sitting on the very finely tuned digital scale. It could measure things down to 1/10 of a gram. So this is not some trivial piece of junk. Some people have tried to duplicate this and send me pictures of it, and I was appalled at the crudity of their gravity wheel. This is not something you can just hack together. It's got to be built precisely, very accurately. The little triangles can't be touching each other. They have to be rightly spaced. There's a whole bunch of physics involved and technology involved in setting this thing up properly. But this was the basic gravity wheel experiment. And the idea of the woofers running at this 51.27 hertz was to turn this force field in these triangles on and off. And it sounds kind of weird, but this frequency, for some reason, some resonant frequency is turning the triangle force field off. It all turns off the three-dimensional force field. And the result of this experiment was that we did this. I was able to verify Joe's discovery of the conduits. And you can, next slide, please. So we got the frequencies that trigger anti-gravity effects. What happens is when certain types of energy impinge upon these force fields and you turn them on and off, it causes these force fields and the triangle to take off. Tries to go in some direction, depending on the type of energy and the focus of it. And these new frequencies are fixed. This is 51.287 is a fixed energy field, fixed frequency, doesn't change. There are other frequencies and things that drift during the time of day, like the Schumann resonance we're all familiar with, 8 to 5, 7 to 8, 9 hertz. There's other frequencies, brain frequencies and stuff that are up in that range. The other thing that affects this experiment was a phase of the moon. The moon has a gravitational effect on the Earth, so it stands to reason that it might affect this experiment as sensitive it is. One of the things that Joe theorized was that the energy particle which strikes the experiment is an initiator of these gravity effects. I didn't think this was right. I thought it was a collapsing of this force field that caused the gravity effect. The energy particles, he thought converted to mass, some unknown metal. And this metal deflates onto the experiment triangles and eventually shorts out the triangle. The metal is gray, non-radioactive, and it has a very low conductivity. So you have to clean the wheel off periodically to get rid of this metal that starts moving between the triangles. Next slide. Conclusions from the gravity experiments show that there's resonance to gravity forces. In other words, a frequency phenomena. The pyramid shape tunes to these forces and that exhibit these effects. And triangles, which are planar versions of the three-dimensional Great Pyramid, also have these similar effects. And the energy particles triggers these effects appears to concentrate when we're going between these conduits between our sun and other star systems. And one of the results of this was that Joe and I both theorized that this is some way to build a star drive. Next experiment. This is kind of a picture. This was not discovered by Joe, it was discovered by some previous researchers and is in another book. But they found out that the alignment of the pyramids in Egypt on the Plateau of Giza are in the same alignment as the three stars in Orion's belt, which is kind of interesting. It shows that there is a constellation resonance to some star systems out there, and that's what these scientists have built the pyramid were trying to convey.
In the first episode of Pateo Television, I explained that and I showed pictures of that. So my viewers are familiar with this, I hope.
Yeah, they've done aerial pictures of this stuff and shown that they do fit. And plus, of course, the early researchers of the pyramid showed that there was they've accurately surveyed these pyramids at the nth degree, and so there was a good correlation to show. They also found that there were other pyramids and temples along the Nile as they went north on the Nile, or no, I guess it would be south. There were other pyramids and things that align with other stars out there in the cosmos. So this is not just an isolated thing as far as the three pyramids at the Plateau of Giza. Next slide. This is kind of an overview. When the star drive, or it's not a star drive, when the gravity wheel experiment was running, we got these huge gravitational changes when the Earth was at certain points in our orbit around the sun. It turns out that around December 15th to January 15th, there's a strong, huge energy gravitational field that affects the gravity experiment. And we theorize that there's some kind of an energy conduit, like a beam of energy that goes from our sun out to Orion's belt. And there are other conduits around the orbit. We go around the sun, and some of these were mapped. I think they're mentioned all in the Shape Parr book. Next slide, please. So if you analyze this both the centrifuge and the gravity wheel, leaves the possibility of a star drive and possibly a stargate. Definitely a star drive, because we think that when you get a craft that is tuned to these forces, you're going to get accelerated either toward the sun or away from the sun. Now, if you're on some other star system, you want to go toward our sun, and if you're on here in our solar system, you'd probably want to get on one of these energy gates and go towards some other star system. And I theorize that these energy conduits or paths are part of this basic structure of the universe. And if anybody interested in trying to fund some of this, I think we could have a lot of fun with it.
I think this is worth more than spending money on NASA and hoping that you get to Mars one day, but that is my take on this.
Yeah, we need to fix this planet before we go shooting off into the stars.
I think so too, yes.
Now we're back to some of my shape bars ideas and stuff. If you have arrays of some shape power device like a pyramid, and you put these into an array, like a 3D array, say like you see here in the picture, you're going to multiply the various field effects. One of the things you want to be aware of is that if you make your pyramid out of metal, you do not want to have pyramids touching. You want a slight non-conductive path between pyramids. This is one of the important things. Otherwise, you're going to start sorting out the effects that occur in the pyramid energy. Next slide, please. Rules for shape power arrays. The size of a power shape is immaterial. You can have a small pyramid or a big pyramid. They're both going to have a force field around them. There'll be a force field around a 1-inch pyramid as well as around the big pyramid in Egypt, or any size in between. If you have arrays of a shape power device, you're going to multiply the effects by the number of repetitions of the energy shape. For example, a pyramid. If you got a bunch of them, they're going to have, if you got 6 of them, it's going to have 6 times more of the total power. So if you got a spaceship that is covered with little pyramids, all those little pyramids are going to multiply the total power you have around the spaceship that allows you to do some fantastic anti-gravity effect. And if you have a material, especially engineered material, at the atomic level made of pyramids, you would have huge amounts of energy based on the size of the craft that you have and all of this atomic structure that's entirely pyramid structure. So there's a little hint on what's possible as far as special materials go. I think a lot of our material science is moving into possibly ways where we could generate these types of things. We could engineer the materials on an atomic and nano level to do the things that we want that material to do. One of the interesting stories that I ran across when I was doing research on shape power and things is the government had captured one of these spacecraft, and they had taken the energy system apart, and it was made out of a bunch of strange shapes. And so the scientists for analyzing this thought that they had figured out how this works. So they duplicated all these shapes down to the gnat's eyebrow and put this thing together, and it didn't work. Whereas if they put the one together that was in the spacecraft, it had a certain amount of energy characteristics. Well, what they didn't realize that the material is an energized material that has certain capabilities within the various individual elements. And these different elements work together to create the gravity or energy effects that they existed on this craft that they captured. One of the things you can learn about arrays is it can be 2 or 3 dimensional. That was one of the things that came out of the stuff that I did with Joe Parr. Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have some fun with shape power lenses and the shape power effects. You can make a lens out of an array of closely spaced circular lines and then concentrate the ether and have it do things like form a beam of energy. You can use this energy for healing and various things like that. And this next slide shows that. This is a little device that I made that I was experimenting with. If you take that picture this is the top and build an array like that, and then build a smaller array that you see here in the middle of this figure, since this pattern grabs the ether and forces it into this into a vortex. As that vortex comes screaming out the back of the figure, a smaller one will concentrate it further. So by the time you put several of these together, you get a high concentrated beam of etheric energy and also other kinds of forces that exist with it. So these are some of the fun things you can do with experimentation. It doesn't take a lot of money to do a lot of these experiments. You know, when I started out in the early days, I thought I had to have this fancy lab and, you know, people working on these experiments, kind of a team type approach. But it didn't take me long to realize that our discoveries are in such a low state as far as shape power goes and the understanding of the ether that you can do a lot of these experiments at home with simple materials. And I'll talk a little more about that when we go on.
From my understanding, Dan, the ether is somehow drawn into this from left to right, so the big shape here, then into here, and so on until here.
Yeah, each one of those little smaller and smaller lenses concentrates the energy more and more.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, great.
The implication of arrays. Gravitation. If a single shape power produces minute gravitational effects, then a larger array can multiply that effect. So you can get macro gravity effects. Free energy. If a single shape produces minute free energy effects, then a large array can multiply that effect. Shapes can be microscopic. Okay, so you don't have to have big, huge shapes like the Great Pyramid. You can have very small shapes that are microscopic. So large arrays of trillions will have a corresponding effect, macro effect that you can generate. So this is where engineered materials are going to come into place. Is we will be able to engineer microscopic effects for a material that it will generate free energy and gravity or whatever we want it to do. The ether has lots of things associated with it. It's also very important to have a purified ether. And I'll talk a little more about that later. Next slide.
Yeah, one day sports might start to discover this, and then they create suits that enable people to skate faster or cycle faster or run faster. But that will come, I think, one day.
Yeah. So we get more into etheric science. Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
One of the things that if you model the ether as a hydrodynamic superfluid, Paul Stowe and Barry Minks, who is a professor at the University of California, got together and put together a nice paper on this. They modeled the ether as this hydrodynamic superfluid and actually derived the concept that the ether particle is an electron that the basic forces of the electron have all of the different properties associated with it that you have with the physics. And a proton is nothing more than an electron that is on a smaller resonant level. Now, a neutron is a compressed proton inside of an electron. And the proof of this is when you have a neutron taken out of the nucleus, it degrades in about 15 seconds to an electron and a proton. Now this ought to tell you something. Next slide, please.
So the bigger one here, this is the electron representing, and the smaller one is the proton.
These are, you should realize that these are idealized pictures of the electron. If you think about a smoke ring, it's a stable force in the atmosphere. Well, in the ether, the smoke ring is an electron. It's not a smoke ring, it's an ether ring. And this ether ring has different forces associated with it. It's a spinning ring that rotates around its center. It also rotates along the axis of the electron itself. And yeah, go ahead to the next slide. That's good.
Oh, I thought the next picture was showing that, but sorry.
Yeah, this is good. I'm glad you moved to this one. One of the things that came out of my research on shape power and the master power flame and this idealized concept of the electron or the proton, either one, is the various forces that come out of the ether. A vortexing ether results in a magnetic field. That's why you got a magnetic field around an electron. You know, in the old plasma tube TV set, in the old plasma tube oscilloscopes, the magnetic fields are used to control the electrons to give you those pictures on the screen. The other thing that pops out of all of this is that there's a certain drag of the ether. The electron acts like an ether pump, and it's pumping the ether down through the thing, so the ether loses a little bit of that energy in the vortex. And the loss of that energy is the gravity field. Gravity is a result of the ether. Gravity is not an external force at all. One of the reasons we still think of the gravity as a force on Earth is if you jump in the air, you still get pulled out of the Earth. Well, once you get a lot of particles together, the ether, the forces start to align. So the gravity field that's flowing down into all of the mass of the Earth flows down into the Earth like the Earth is a big sponge for the ether flowing into it. So you've got this very oriented field around any large planetary body, or even a small one like the moon. They all have gravity fields. The gravity field is not something by itself. It is created by the mass. The electron and the proton are the basic master stable particles of the universe. The electron and proton have what current scientists believe is a half-life of a huge amount of time, billions and trillions of years. And those are the only two stable particles. The rest is all smoke and mirrors. When you break an electron up or a proton, what you're doing is you're busting it up into ether, and the ether collapses into small unstable particles and eventually disappears. And so these scientists are out there busting up electrons and protons and thinking they're discovering all these particles. Well, all they're discovering is the ether collapsing out of the particle into unstable particles.
Okay. So you say there's an ether vortex coming in, and at the same time also an ether vortex coming out, and that means that we can use that outgoing vortex maybe for levitation technology or something.
Yeah. So what we should be concentrating on is learning to manage the forces that come in and out of the ether, and finding out what this energy is that sustains the ether. It happens to be the master power flame. One of the patterns in the master power flame is the electron and proton patterns. And the rest of it is like blue smoke and mirrors. It's when you collapse one of these ether rings of electrons or protons, the ether is going to gradually degrade into different particles that have a very short half-life, and then they finally dissolve back into the ether. And these are resonant type particles, and one of the reasons they form is because the ether itself has its resonant properties, but the only stable aspect of these particles are the proton and electron. Now just remember, this is an idealized view of forces. Back when Blavatsky got all of her stuff going for her metaphysical things, she had followers that had their inner sight open, and they studied these forces and came up with these different particles that exist within matter, and they call them the Anu, which is the smallest particle of matter. And these forces, of course, were later identified. They found that there were three Anus in I think an electron. It turns out when they are atomic physicists that one of the first particles that pops out of the electron when they break it up is some smaller particles. And that's where the particle theory of the standard model of particle came from. is breakup and the breakdown of the particles of the ether and from the electron or proton. Next slide, please. This is a neutron. This doesn't exist very long. The neutron is, as I said, only lasts for about 15 seconds. Some of the other particles, like a hydrogen atom, you've got the 2 electrons and 2 protons. The helium atom has 4 electrons and 4 protons. And some of the research was done by some other scientists that have modeled the ether, have come up with these particle ideas. And I just modeled them as from some of the graphic material that I have to show how they are idealized. Next slide, please.
Yeah, there's not much time, but I would like maybe some other time to hear your ideas about what actually happens then in a nuclear power plant, because they add extra neutrons to certain atoms, and then they become unstable at a certain moment. The neutron wants to come out again, and but we don't have time for that. But I'd love to hear your views on that one other day, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Our current atomic power is based on a brute force technology where they bombard material in the nuclear reactors with unstable atoms like plutonium and
uranium.
Uranium, thank you. One of the interesting things that happened was a couple of weeks before one of the conferences where I was going to talk at the Tesla conference. A guy who I call Dr. Z, he didn't want to be identified. Oh. He was building a large steel pyramid. This was about 6 or 8 feet high, maybe a little bigger than that, and weighed about over a ton. It's made of steel. It was a step pyramid. And he had 2 welders welding these steel plates together to form this step pyramid. And during the welding of the pyramid, it suddenly raised 6 feet off the floor, and it moved so fast that the Dr. Z and some observers could not see the thing move. I mean, it was suddenly it's 6 feet off the floor. Out of this, it had disconnected the welders and the welding equipment from the pyramid, so it stopped moving. So you had I did a little simple mathematics and figured out it was generating about 1,400 horsepower, which converted to watts is over 1 million watts of power. And welders were only inputting about 5,000 watts from their welders. These were electric welders. And what I theorized happened was that the 2 welders, the energy currents that move through the steel caused probably a scalar wave type phenomena in the pyramid and energized the entire pyramid with this force field, and that's what caused it to jump off the ground. So when the welders were disconnected, there was no longer any force or energy to keep the pyramid going in the direction it was headed, which was off the earth. So the thing fell back to the floor. The 2 welders were knocked off the pyramid onto the floor. Unfortunately, they weren't hurt, but the pyramid itself did suffer a little bit of damage to it. But other than that, it was a dramatic accident, a happy accident, so to speak.
Yeah, so it moved instantly to 6 feet high. You could not see it come up, actually.
Yeah, you couldn't see it move. I mean, it was suddenly 6 feet off the floor.
Yeah, whoa.
And if you, our eye persistence of vision is about, we don't see movement when you have about, was it 14 to 15 frames per second? You probably know the numbers better than I do. And so what happens is you only see movement when it's going at the rate that your eye can respond to the images. So when this thing moved that fast, I knew immediately, based on the persistence of vision, that you can see and not see movement. That's how I computed the horsepower of this big pyramid.
Okay.
Trivial things. Once you get a little education, you can figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
Next slide. Historical gravity control. There was some scientists that went from England over to Tibet. They had been invited there by the Dalai Lama, and they were building a temple from big blocks of stone that had been cut, and they were levitating these blocks up onto this side of this mountain using sound energy. And there is actually a moving picture of this thing. I've never seen the picture, but I've seen a detailed explanation of it. And what the way this experiment worked is they had a Tibetan master who directed the this choir of instrumentation guys like drummers and horn blowers and things to generate the synchronized sound. And because of this, they were directing this into these big blocks of probably granite, and the blocks would become resonant to the sound and had ether flowing through it in a certain direction. And the Tibetan master could then focus his consciousness to direct the ether into the block and make it rise up in the air, and they would arc these big blocks up to the temple. And at the temple level, they had other masters that would slide these big blocks into place for a part of the temple. And of course, there's John Keely's Levitation of the Big Iron Sphere. Reed's gravity belt, this was another one of those interesting happy accidents. Reed was a mechanic working up in Canada, and he had his own automobile repair shop. This was back in the 30s, and of course, automobile repair back then was not nearly as complicated as it is nowadays, where you got computers controlling everything. So the automobiles were much simpler, and some rich guy driving a big fancy, probably a Cadillac or some big fancy car back then. His car broke down outside of the town where this guy lived, and they towed the car in with a horse and a couple of horses, and Reed found out that it was the electrical system. He had to replace one of the coils in the car engine. And he tested this coil, and when he energized it, it jumped off of the lab bench.
Okay.
And so he started studying this, and he found out he'd miswired this coil. And I ended up with a friend contacted me and gave me a whole bunch of information on this, and I spent several years trying to duplicate this coil, but I could never get anything to work. There's virtually no information about what the coil was part of, whether it was part of the starter or whether it was part of the ignition system or the voltage controller. So I did a bunch of experiments and was never able to duplicate this thing. But as the story goes, the reason we found out about it is Reed built a bunch of these little coils and mounted them in a gravity, what I call a belt made of leather. There was a leather guy in town, and he had hired him to make tie all these coils into it. And he energized these coils with some kind of a system that turned the energy to these coils on and off. And these coils would cause them to lift up in the air. And Reed would put on this belt, this gravity belt, I called it, and he would get up and fly around. Well, Reed was a little scared about getting up very high because this wasn't too stable. The vibrator he was using, the points would stick on it, and it would short the thing out, and the coil wouldn't lift anything. So he was scared of getting up in the air and this thing dying on him. So they had a little pond near the town, and he and his buddy that worked with him in the garage, they went out there in a boat and they tested this coil. He had a car battery in this coil around his waist, and he would levitate up above this kind of a lagoon it was, and fly around, and he had a little bit of control on this thing. And occasionally the vibrator would fart out and he would go splashing into the drink, and his buddy would have to rescue him because he would be sinking under the this big well.
Oh.
That's how we found out about it, because the local newspaper wrote this thing out, and there was a number of stories in the local newspapers, and there was a friend of mine, his father had actually done a bunch of research on this guy Reed, and had tried with another friend of his to duplicate these coils, and he had spent almost his entire retirement time trying to duplicate these coils, but they were never able to, and I kind of ended up as a repository of these, what little data was generated. So here's another case, a happy accident case of a coil causing something. Another thing that was caused was a caducean coil levitation. I think it's on the internet if you search for it. And it was the caducean coil was energized by microwaves, and it went jumping across the lab table. But they never did anything with it, or we don't know if anything was ever happened after this. And of course, there's Dr. Z's levitation of the big pyramid, big steel thing that levitated up in the air. Next slide. Their master power flame. The ancient term, the logos, is not well defined. There was more well defined by some teachings from the masters, and they called it the master power flame. And it turns out that the master power flame holds all of the blueprints, patterns, and energies that enable the creation of an ideal universe. One of the things that always intrigued me was, where do these masters get the energies that they do the things with? They call this energy the sacred fire. And the sacred fire controls all energy levels below it. So the sacred fire actually comes out of the master power flame. And the sacred fire enables the master to exhibit and operate at higher levels of creative ability. Things like dissolving and consuming disease patterns and things in body, instantaneous healing, creation of matter and material apparently out of the universe, out of no material. You know, much of these stage magicians fake it all with sleight of hand. These masters actually create energy and things out of there from the ether. The other thing the master power flame has is all the patterns for atomic structures. In other words, atoms and protons, electrons, and the atoms on a bigger scale. Things like DNA, for perfect DNA, all of these patterns exist in the master power flame. So if we lived in an ideal universe, which it really is on higher levels, but on this level it doesn't seem to be very ideal.
No.
That's a gross understatement. If we can focus the master power flame, we can cure all diseases. We could do all kinds of fantastic things. But this is not something that some nasty person can operate. It can only operate from a higher level of consciousness. So next slide, please. I went through and classified the various energies. The master power flame is the highest level of pure energy that exists, and next below it, I should have put the ether in this slide. And the ether itself is acted on by the patterns and things from the master power flame. The sacred fire has these patterns and energies, and it's patterns of total perfection. The sacred fire energy can perfect energy patterns below it. For example, if you've got a disease is caused by two things. One is filth and garbage in your system on the 4 levels, physical, mental, emotional. And the sacred fire can fix these patterns and give you health. So if we learn how to use the sacred fire in different types of instrumentation, we can basically cure all diseases. The next thing, the next level down, is the ether itself. It's pure energy. I was thinking it should have been above that, and it probably should, but it's debatable where it should be on this list.
Yeah.
Below that is electromagnetism, which is wave patterns in the ether, electromagnetic patterns. And the next level below that is actually a pure energy of the ether. If you get outside in a nice shiny day, you can see this chi energy popping in and out. It looks like little sparks of light. And up here at this high altitude, we have a lot of this chi energy. And the next level below that is orgone. William Reich discovered what he thought was pure energy. It was actually an impure energy that had a lot of distortions in it. And people that have worked with orgone energy have had a lot of detrimental health effects and things. So you want to be very careful about using orgone. If you're generating orgone from impure materials, and I must caution you, most materials on this level have been very distorted and are impure. This earth is at one time a sun in space. It used to radiate light. And as mankind lowered their energies, they lowered the energy of the earth. And this is why we've ended up on a planet that doesn't have too much light. In fact, the earth is known as a dark star from the higher levels. So be careful of orgone energy. Chi is also called prana in the Hindu system. And you can sit outside and consciously pull this energy into your bodies and purify and perfect them. You do breathing exercises that consciously bring this prana into your body, and you will start purifying it. This is one of the aspects of the yoga Hindu exercises, is the breathing. One of the Hindu scientists, Dr. Tiwari, who's very instrumental in working on free energy devices, told me one time that he spent an hour a day doing pranayama exercises. Now, pranayama exercise means little breathing exercise. And so he was well aware that this chi energy increases his health and perfects his body and consciousness.
Yeah, I myself work a lot with all kinds of chi approaches. But coming back to orgone, the people who work with this from William Reich, they say there is dark orgone and light orgone. The dark one they call dark, but if I hear you correctly, then you say also what they call the light orgone is still very dangerous and can be very detrimental to health.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for clearing it up.
Next slide.
Yeah.
The sacred fire. Here's on the left we see a person, he calls to his higher self, his God presence, and calls for the violet flame to blaze around him, and the higher self blazes this violet flame around his 4 lower bodies, physical, mental, emotional, etheric bodies. And the intensity of this call and the consciousness of the person gets purified by this sacred fire, like the violet flame blazing around the 4 lower bodies. So that's a purification process that anybody can call into action. Next slide.
Yeah. It's good that you bring it up, because my guest of last week explained the very same thing, but then from a different approach, but you're on the same spot here, so that's good.
Now, I just wanted to say a little bit about how I get some of my guidance and visions. One of the things I worked very strongly for that I realized back in the 50s and 60s, I had to learn to follow my guidance. Mm-hmm. And my guidance I defined as information that came through from higher sources of spirituality and allowed me to operate at a higher level. Now, some of these visions that I've gotten, in all cases, I'm in the great silence. In other words, I've stilled down my physical, mental, emotional bodies. And the masters project a vision on the inner screen of my mind. Or if another case, I may be in sleep and I get put into a lucid scenario that contains a vision or some definite information on how to do something, and I plop back into the body. And the other way I get is a total concept in my mind of something I'm working on. I always keep a notepad by me to write down information at night. And of course, then the next step is to start implementing things that they have given me in the laboratory. And I'm not saying I'm anybody special. You can do this too. If anybody can learn to meditate, they can purify themselves with the sacred fire. They can tune into their higher self, their I am presence, and they can ask for guidance. There are literally thousands of inventions that are sitting on the inner level waiting to come forth to bless mankind. But because most of mankind is working at such a low state, nobody is interested in cleaning up their karma and their garbage and moving to a higher level. But anybody can do this. You can be at the lowest level and inside of a short period of time be getting really good guidance and things from your higher self, your great eye.
We all have the receiver, but we just need to tune it to the right frequency, so to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next case, next vision. This is one of the visions that again is a healing wand. A friend of mine in Tucson, I'd go up and visit him, and he was into rocks and crystals and stuff, and he was always giving me a present of some kind of rock or crystal. And one time we were riding home and, after a visit with Joe, and I asked him, why is Joe giving me all of these crystals? I said, they're nice crystals, but what am I supposed to do with them? You know, everything has a purpose, you know. And so what happened was the next morning as I came out of sleep, the picture of this healing wand was flashed onto my consciousness. It had a microcontroller in it. It had a coil wrapped around the crystal. It was energized by this microcontroller, and it had different frequencies and patterns in the microcontroller that energized the crystal. And outside of the crystal, at the point of it, it focused a beam of energy, pure, clean energy. So I had all the parts for this. My dear wife was having a little trouble with her knee, so I asked her, I told her about the dream, and she asked me if I would build one of these things since I had the parts, because she was very interested in, having better health. So I built one of these things and took it into her. It took me several days to build this thing. And the net result was that she treated her knee with this thing for about 5 minutes, and all of the problems that she had had with her knee disappeared. It was gone.
Wow.
So I told a few other people about this. There was a lady up in Tucson who was interested in having one of these, so I built her one. And she had a neighbor that was interested in it, so she loaned this wand to her neighbor. And her neighbor's husband had been suffering for the last 6 months from a back operation. The guy could hardly walk, in really bad shape. And so his wife treated him with this wand every day, several times a day. And at the end of 2 weeks, the back had rebuilt itself, and this guy was walking around normal with no back pain.
Wow.
And this was one of the anecdotal type of things that happened with this little wand. Well, there was a vision number 2 that happened with respect to this. And this was a combination of the shape power pattern, the master power frame, inner technology, and this the very first wand that I built. And I came up with this simple little wand, and the thing is not very big. It's about 4 inches, 3.5, 4 inches. It's got a nice purified crystal, and it's a man-made crystal, but it's made with special quartz material that has been purified and cut free from all manufacturing defects, and cut free from any psychic or low-level patterns, and it's driven by a pattern that is tuned to the center of the galaxy. So this thing has a beam coming off it about 6 to 8 feet long. People that are clairvoyants have seen the beam coming off this. And when you point this aura device, I call it, if you point it at a chakra, it pumps your chakra out about it pumps your aura out about 6 to 8 inches. And so if you move up the spine from the base of the spine up to the next to the top of the head, which is your third eye, all of these chakras will pump your aura out about 6 inches. And then if you point the AD down at your crown chakra, it energizes all of the chakras at once and pumps your aura out about 3 feet all the way around you. And the people that are clairvoyants or clairsentients can see this happen.
Wow, it's a really powerful tool. That's a great thing, Dan.
Yeah, very interesting little device. The first vision, the devices are powered by a battery, which is the longer one, or the short one, which is powered by a plug-in transformer. So next slide. This is another vision. It's a miracle manifestation medallion. And this is a medallion that's been, I had them manufactured and purified when I got them, and cut free from all manufacturing defects or anything else. And clairvoyants can see a big beam of energy coming off these things on both sides. And you hold one of these things and it'll pump your aura out about 3 or 4 feet, just like the AAD. But there's more healing energy in the wand. These are good to just carry around with you. Now, I need to take another quick break. Been drinking too much water here.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is really powerful stuff. And yeah, and people who have the ability to see energies. I myself did a training to see, for instance, aura. And in the beginning, it's really kind of blurry and fake. But after a while, when you become more and more aware what to look for, then you start actually see the energy field. So we can somehow train our eyes to see that subtle energies around somebody, and we can develop that ability, so to say. And people who have developed that into much further, they are what we call clairvoyant. They can see clearly, or they can see outside the physical world, or they can see the energetic world, so to say, at the other side of the veil. And that ability, I think, is really, really interesting, because all the technology we are now talking about here, that is technology beyond the physical world. It's in the energetic world, the world of the subtle energies, and that's where these devices have their effect. So I think it's really powerful tools. And I also like the word "I am" in the center, because that's it's a kind of reaffirming our identity, our true identity.
Okay, I'm ready again.
We have 15 more minutes left, Dan. I'm not sure how far you are in the presentation, but we need to round up in about 15 minutes.
I'll zip through them real quick. How's that?
Should I go to the next one?
Next slide.
Yeah. Oh, that's too fast.
I think you went 2 slides. Back up 1. No, you're right. Programmable universe, command structures. The M3 is a command structure. These are patterns that are activated and organized in the ether. One of the things I found out is that different types of patterns where they energize the ether to do different things. For example, the M3 and the AAD organize the ether and project healing energies out these devices. The Master Power Flame contains all the necessary patterns, these command structures, to create matter, and intelligence beings can organize basic command structures for whatever they want. This is a technology that you see on Star Trek. You have the duplicator. You get a duplicator would be running on this type of system. It would create patterns in the ether, and you could create anything you wanted. The sacred fire is basically a command structure and also a product of the command structure. Next slide. Two rules for patterns. All tuned identical patterns are resonated on all levels. In other words, the pyramid is resonated with all the other pyramids on the planet. Resonance on this level is instantaneous. No basic patterns, in other words, not NPF, are tuned to their creator and is responsible. So this is where you start creating karma. You create a pattern that's not very good, like hate or anger. You're tuned into that, and you've got to get rid of it if you want to move forward. Non-basic patterns can be dissolved via the sacred fire. So if you've got some bad energies around you, you can use the sacred fire and get rid of it. This is a process of etherealization on the etheric level.
Oh.
And patterns do not have to be physical. Like the pyramid is a physical structure. You can also create a pyramid mentally and do the same effects. The same thing as a lot of non-physical patterns or two-dimensional patterns that create all kinds of things that you want. When you use a pattern, it precipitates whatever is the pattern acts like a program and organizes the ether to do whatever the command is structured to do in the pattern. Next slide.
Wow. So that's how we become wizards and sorcerers.
Yeah, the sky's the limit on patterns. Command-oriented materials. The Aetheric crystal and the M3 are command-oriented materials. All levels of the M3 have been purified and imbued with certain commands. Common command structures, command-oriented materials are like homeopathic materials. Most homeopathic materials are only programmed on 1 or 2 levels, so they can be easily erased with a magnet. That's why you have to be careful about what you do around homeopathic materials. Voodoo, black magic materials are on only one level. A little bit of the sacred fire gets rid of any of those bad negative patterns. Programmed crystals I have seen are mostly command-oriented materials and not permanent. So people that claim they've got these healing crystals and stuff, they're not very well programmed. Next slide. Two major aspects of pattern physics. Energized patterns organize the ether to do some function. They'll manifest physical states, they'll manifest energy patterns, they'll manifest ether into a pattern. The key to this science is to find the patterns that do what we want. And the next thing that's needed is an energizer technology to trigger these patterns. And that's the second piece of the pattern puzzle. The master power flame technology is a low level, when I say low level, I mean it is an entry level type of technology. Next slide. The potential of the master power flame technology. We can end pollution. In other words, you can transmute all of the garbage that exists in our world into pure ether. This is the Star Trek duplicator type technology. Some young kid called me one time and said, Mr. Davidson, do you think we'll ever get to the point where we can create things like with a Star Trek duplicator? And I said, you betcha, you can do that someday. Right now, we have to be careful what we duplicate. Faster than light travel. I think we're going to have FTL travel both on the planet as well as the solar. In other words, our solar system or stellar between stars. Will eliminate disease and mental and physical. In other words, we will be able to purify all these negative patterns around people and clean us up so we live on a higher level. People will be living at the highest level of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual consciousness. We will live in a world of peace and harmony. That's what's coming down the pike. Next slide, please.
Yeah, beautiful words. When we first saw the episodes of Star Trek and people were tapping on their chest and were communicating wireless, we thought it was science fiction, but now it's already so common we don't even think about it anymore. So the duplicator technology will certainly arrive here. I fully agree.
Science fact becomes science, or science fiction becomes science fact. That's one of the old things.
Yes.
Master power flame technology. Various clairvoyants that I've worked with and also people that I know fairly well have seen this energy around persons on the master power flame process. I can project a thin presence of pure master power flame sacred fire around anybody or anything on the planet with this technology. And I've seen it myself, and I've seen the people that are very much into metaphysics and the light. They do not have this energy around them like we can put around them with the master power flame. People can be very high level, but not have enough energy to really operate at the levels they should be operating on. And this master power flame can help people operate on these higher levels.
Okay.
Next slide, please. Current status of the master power flame technology. When past science discovered electricity, they found that electrostatic charge would make a frog kick. The master power flame technology is at the frog kicking stage. I've got an effect. The hard part comes now, developing the effect. The fancy master power flame computer, or however you want to think about it, is yet to come. In other words, a duplicator or whatever we're going to do with the healing machines are yet to be developed and invented. And they're sitting back there in the levels of the masters ready to come to Earth if you get your act cleaned up and you can bring forth this stuff.
Wow. Powerful. Cutting edge technology. Great.
Future. Development of the master power flame machines, creation of matter, transmission of matter, faster light technology, research projects, gravity control, over unity energy, fast and light projects, and perfect healing systems. Next slide. An MPF lab to the future. We got personnel requirements. You can't have a bunch of negative people working in this type of a laboratory. They got to be able to get guidance from their higher self, their I am presence. The scientists who understand that negatively qualified energy is etheric research. They need to be clear of negative patterns in mind and body. We need to have clairvoyance who can see and feel and understand the energies. The equipment, we need regular current technology instrumentation as well as orthodox things like oscilloscopes and stuff, and we need advanced technology like the master power flame and way beyond. Next. Products that I've developed with the master miracle manifestation medallion, the Aetheric ray wand, and I have this Krypton's the master power flame. Next slide.
Something's wrong. Uh-oh. My computer is not up for this new technology yet. Let me see. Yeah, there it comes.
So, what does the future hold? Well, it's up to you, all of you out there that are in internet land, to clean yourself up, get your act together, and I praise and decree that God bless you, and may the master power flame be with you, to paraphrase a famous statement. That's about it, Johan. Is there anything else?
No, I think, yeah, the time's also up, almost up, but I think it was a really powerful presentation, and what I like most of it is the positive reach you do to the future, and all the things people worry about nowadays, they will disappear as snow for sunlight when we start to understand the etheric science that you have explained here. So I'm really, really appreciative for your time, and even more for your work you've done in so many years, because you are a true pioneer of the times to come, in my opinion.
Thank you, Johan, and I appreciate you letting me be on this. It's a pleasure, and I pray that all those out there are listening and watching, this will somehow help them go forward in their divine plan.
I think so too. So yeah, it's time to round up, and yeah, we'll see how the future will bring. If they want to contact you, they can send me a message, and I will forward it to you. You have books for sale. You have your Power Shape book, is still a few copies available, and also your newer book, I think, is also for sale.
Well, I think you skipped one of the slides where I showed my websites and things. I've got two websites. One of them is masterpowerflame.com, and the other is ethericscience.com. And you can contact me through those websites. They have my email addresses.
Yes, somehow it's not here, but I'll put in the text on on my website, on the video, the information, so they'll click to your website immediately. So that will be taken care of. For now,
Okay.
for now our time's up. So thank you very much, Dan, for being here with us. And viewers, thank you very much for viewing this episode of Pateo Television. If you like it, then tune in next week, same station, same time. And then I will talk about what I call the David Bowie Code. So that will be an interesting story, because we also talk about voodoo and other stuff as well. So maybe you tune in next week. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCN broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.